Welcome back to the Political Marketing Podcast with me, Benedict Pringle. This is the podcast that seeks to understand how election candidates, political parties, and campaigning organizations win hearts, minds, and votes. Lately, if you talk to any political consultant or campaign manager, they all share a similar problem. They're finding it really tough to get the attention of their voters. The combination of media fragmentation and, frankly, the ease with which people can avoid anything that looks remotely like an ad means that it's really hard to make your message heard. Now, one way that most brands and sectors have successfully addressed some of these challenges is by investing heavily in influencer marketing. And one of the really interesting things is that in politics, influencer marketing has, in my view anyway, been pretty nascent in comparison to other sectors. But in the most sort of recent cycles, there have been signs that's about to shift or has already started to shift. So why has there been so much skepticism within the political world about influencer marketing? Why is that beginning to change? And what does good political influencer marketing actually look like? To discuss all that and more, I'm joined by two people at the absolute forefront of political influencer marketing. Ryan Davis is a long-time Democratic digital strategist who got his start on Howard Dean's very famous 2004 web team. He went on to become the first social media director at Blue State, so another Blue State alumni on the podcast, where he worked on over 50 campaigns, including Obama 2012 campaign. He served as digital director for a dozen state and local campaigns and is the founder of People First, the first influencer marketing company in American politics. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
And joining Ryan is Nicole Dunger, who is a digital engagement strategist whose work sits at the intersection of audience behavior, social media, and public influence. Trained in demographic analysis and social listening, she's worked with campaigns, nonprofits, and brands to help them better understand and engage their audiences. Nicole, great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ryan, let's start with the big picture. Talk to me about what has changed that means that political influencer marketing is starting to get major traction.
Yeah, well, we started People First in 2019. We were the first sort of Democratic group doing influencer in the U.S., and we spent a good year explaining to Democratic strategists and agencies sort of what political influencers were. And then the next cycle by 2022, folks really started picking up and kind of getting it. And then in 24 is where it really kind of went mainstream. And now I think we're sort of in that moment that Obama was in 2008, where like social media was really a thing and a powerful thing. And now we're seeing that in the 26 cycle. And, to give credit where credit is due, I think it's because, Trump really showed in 2024 the power of working with decentralized media and creators to get into cultural spaces. And, now Democrats are working to play catch up. And we've seen a lot of that this cycle, a lot of folks, thinking about creators much earlier and running more sophisticated programs.
That's really interesting. And Nicole, if you could talk to us a little bit, maybe picking up on that Trump point about starting to work with different creators and sort of publishers that gets you into that cultural space. What is it about the nature of the content that means that stuff is cutting through more than a sort of a classic piece of digital advertising or even like a TV ad?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to the messenger versus the message. It's by partnering with real people who are creating content that already is hitting the algorithms that people are already paying attention to, interested in, and partnering with those individuals to share a message that they relate to, like authentically in their own voice, how they generally talk to their audience, is actually how you break through. It feels more like your friend talking to you in your living room than it does feel like an ad of someone trying to convince you one way or the other. And that is what really lands, but it comes down to who you work with, and those being real people who have real life experience, not necessarily always just partnering with the people who talk about politics all the time on social media and are kind of like the news reporters of Instagram, but instead talking with like, suburban moms who really could benefit from having access to childcare. Things like that is how you start to really break through.
And so you delineate between sort of political influencers or creators and non-political creators. Ryan, perhaps you could tell me a little bit about, you know, is one good and one bad, or do campaigns need to think about working with both political and non-political? Like, how do you sort of build an effective campaign? Is it one or the other, or is it kind of a mix of both?
Yes, I think it's what you're trying to accomplish. So, in the US, in the primary system, if you're a Democrat going up against another Democrat, it really makes sense to work with political creators on the Democratic side because they're speaking to, those voters. But as you move into the general election and you're looking for folks who are less politically engaged to get excited about your candidate, that's when that pivot to more cultural influencers makes a lot of sense. And we've really looked at the audiences of these creators, and the political creators, they reach a very tuned in, educated, high prosperity, devout audience versus the non-political creators who are going to reach, more normie folks who are less engaged in these conversations day to day. So I think strategically, we ask our clients to think about who they're trying to persuade, what they're trying to do, and then, we make recommendations about political or non-political or a mix of both depending.
That's really interesting, and particularly the delineation between like a primary and a general. That makes total sense. That you would sort of have a different creator strategy, and I mean, some of the listeners may be au fait with this sort of language, but others may not. Talk to us a little bit about about what a macro influencer is. Lots of people when they think about influencers, they might think about Kylie Jenner or whoever it might be. Talk about macro influencers and micro influencers. Like, what's the sort of level of followership that we're talking about? And again, is it helpful to have a mix of both, or in politics, is a macro influence less useful than perhaps in other segments?
Nicole, you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. We actually think about, like you said, you think about a macro influencer, these capital I influencers like your Kylie Jenners, your Taylor Swift. Um, they reach a lot of people. They reach a really wide audience, which can be beneficial if you're looking to get some awareness out there. Even when we think about macro, we actually think about creators between 500,000 and 2 million followers. Once you go above 2 million, that's when you start to reach like social celebrity status. But basically, anyone in either of those categories, what they're doing is just purely awareness. And what you're going to get in a partnership with them um, is a little bit more vague, less niche, less specific. A good example is when Taylor Swift went online and told everyone they should go vote. She didn't say vote for who or for what or why. She just posted a picture with her cat and said you should go do it. That's the type of content that you'll get at that level. We actually have two other levels below that we think about. So we have our mid-tier creators. These are people with between 50,000 and 500,000 followers, and we think of them as driving consideration. So their audiences are still pretty broad, but they create content that might be more niche and curated to specific types of individuals of interest, and so what they can do is kind of get that awareness that makes people think about taking an action or, be more interested in it because they can tell something a little bit more nuanced to their experience. And then when we think about micro influencers, we're thinking of those with 50,000 or less followers, and they're driving persuasion. Their followers are people who are committed to whatever their niche is of the content they create. Like I follow accounts and all they talk about is Star Wars. You could easily blend a political message into into Star Wars content. So thinking about that, and we want to build an ideal program is a pyramid. So you've got maybe one or two macro influencers at the top, you've got 10 mid-tier creators, and you've got a larger group of like 30 micro influencers who are really keeping that conversation driven over a longer period of time.
Yeah, if you're running for MP in Leeds, it might be cool if Tom Holland posts about you on Instagram, but that's probably not going to move voters in Leeds. But if you work with somebody who talks about the restaurant scene, the nightlife scene in Leeds, and they have a big local audience, even though they only have 30,000 followers, that person is probably going to be more impactful to that local race.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that is one of the things I've been thinking about a lot with regards to political influencer marketing. Is in politics, geography is super important, right? Probably more than most sectors. Like geography is probably the number one targeting that most people are interested in, right? Because some areas of the country or some neighborhoods are in play and some are not in play. How can you how do you understand the geography of the followers of the creators that you're working with? I'm sure that must be one of the first questions that comes up whenever you speak to a potential client.
Yeah, it's actually a little mix of science and vibes. So there's the science of seeing, there are a number of tools out there that will show you, here's the top, 5 cities that have of their follower count. So you could see of the followers, the top largest demos are in these 5 cities. So there's that piece you can use. But the way that the algorithms work these days, just because you follow someone doesn't mean you're going to see their content. And even if you don't follow someone, you will likely still see their content. So utilizing the vibes piece of, like Ryan said, someone who is located somewhere, creating content in that location, talking about that location, the algorithm is going to feed it to people in that area. So kind of utilizing what we know about how the algorithm is pulling content, and capitalizing on that to get it in front of those audiences we're looking to target.
So it's one of my enduring beliefs about political communication is that credibility is currency. If voters don't think you have the right to talk about something, they won't listen, regardless of how valid or well argued the point is. And so, in a world where you're paying someone to make a point, there's a risk that any credibility goes out of the window. How do you mitigate for this?
That's a great question. First off, we advocate for our creators to be transparent about the partnership. There's a lot of evidence, certainly research that's been done on the brand side, the commercial side, showing that people are more likely to trust a creator who is open and transparent about their relationship with a product or a candidate that they're working with. So that's one thing. And then to make sure you're finding creators that are a real fit. So, that actually makes sense as the messengers. And I think, Nicole, you might want to unpack that one a bit.
Yeah, that's why I really led with the concept that in order for this to have an impact, it really depends on the messenger. It wouldn't make sense for me, a white woman living in New York City, to talk about, the impacts that local legislation has on a black man living in Georgia. Working with the right people in the right communities who can speak to the issues is kind of our entire thesis and how we approach doing the type of content and creator partnerships that we do. You can see this is often why also you can see that sometimes the political creators aren't the ones that are really landing, persuading, influencing the decisions people make because they're more like policy pundits, people that I would listen to as a very actively politically engaged person, but not somebody that your everyday consumer would be engaging with. And so they don't have that level of trust to communicate issues that might be valid but aren't something that they themselves experience.
The more the campaign can sort of be open with the message and let the creator sort of guide the message within their audience, the more impactful that content's going to be. So don't over prescribe or over script the creator. Give them some guardrails, obviously, but you're working with that creator because they can speak to that audience and leads. They have that audience, so trust them to be able to communicate in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I guess because you wouldn't want to hire a creator and that for their, whole vibe and aesthetic and tone, and then say, yeah, that's all really great, but could you could you do it just like this and make sure you hit this point? Um, but like, does that mean that you have to sacrifice on message discipline? Obviously, this comes. You campaigns will be deciding to invest in influencer over something else typically. Um, d- you know, do you see evidence that you can land enough message that makes that sort of moves people's perspectives on things? Nicole, do you want
Yeah,
to
I
touch
think
on that one?
yeah, I think that there's a lot that goes into political communication, and we've gotten really comfortable in the TV placements, in the advertising placements that we do, that we have full control over, and we've message test the hell out of that message, and we know that it's going to supposedly work based on the science. But a lot of what political communication really is on the ground is that door to door knocking, that hosting local events and communicating with real people in the community. And that is more the place that influencer marketing leans closer to, because these are real people talking to real community members, and if it's overly scripted, it's just not going to be received well by those people. You can give someone what they should say at the door when they're door knocking, but you actually have no idea what they're really saying, but we know that it can work. So leaning into that trust of the process that we've had forever, and bringing a little bit more of that trust into the creator space is, I think, how we become more strategic in our approach versus taking like the more traditional marketing perspective into the space.
Yeah, totally. And I guess coming back a bit to the geography point. I mean, I know that lots of brands and indeed, I'm sure political campaigns use paid media using the influencer asset, right? So you do a partnership post, you can boost that post with paid, which means you can be a little bit more deliberate about which geographies see that post and what demos and things like that. I guess one of the sort of considerations on that is if you are not a follower of that creator and you're seeing them in your feed for the first time, you know, they're sort of they're just a random person, right? so like again, I'm interested. Like, obviously, if it's a really good piece of communication, it doesn't really matter that you don't know the person because you're kind of you're hooked in anyway and you're watching it. But presumably, the real power comes from you follow this person and they're then telling you about some political cause or issue. Um, Presumably, you've done some testing. Is it more powerful when you do know the influencer than if it's just a sort of a random person that you, albeit stop and engage with the content?
Well, like we talked about earlier, so much of the internet now is algorithmically controlled. So you're seeing content from people who, match your demographics or your geography or your affinities, as opposed to just people that you follow. So if you're casting the creator right, if you're working with, white suburban married women creators, and you're going to put that up against an audience of white suburban women in Wisconsin, that's still going to pop because it still kind of touches the sort of community kind of level that we're looking to do when we're working with creators. So I think that the way that I think about it is you've got that initial, first phase where that content's going live on that creator's channel and their followers are seeing it. And you've got that second phase where it's getting picked up by the algorithm and it's being seen by, folks who the algorithm thinks are relevant. And then the third phase where you're being super strategic about where you put that content and who you put that content in front of. And you're using it in an email, or you putting it on a landing page, or you using it in programmatic or social boosting. So, from what we've seen, the content separated from the creator, it outperforms traditional campaign creative. Whether or not it works as well as it does when that creator first posts it, that's I think that's still an open question, but it at least performs as well as some of the content that you're paying a consultant to make.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that, and just the mere fact that it feels very native to the platform and doesn't sort of sell hard, you're automatically going to be, scoring better than something that looks like a hard sell ad. Yeah, I totally agree. Now, one of the main ways, one hears that influencer political marketing is starting to, have more sort of get more traction is you read in sort of the mainstream news, whether it's you're reading in the Washington Post or the Times or whatever. Oh, Kamala Harris or Keir Starmer had some big major policy initiative, and they invited a bunch of bloody influencers to come along. The mainstream media sort of being a bit grumpy that maybe they didn't get the best seats at the event or whatever it might be. And I guess like my assumption when you sort of read about that is, that is a sort of unpaid gig that the political leaders have given access basically and said, come and have this amazing experience at the White House or at 10 Downing Street or whatever. Um, how effective is this? And are the sorts of creators that they actually want to work with, are they genuinely interested in attending that sort of thing? I guess they might be interested in attending because who would turn down a visit to the White
Right.
House? But
Right. So
are they then going to go and post about that sort of thing, about the sort of it's sort of I'm interested in this. Like I've got no priors about whether it's useful or not.
so if you're Donald Trump and you have the White House, or if you're Keir and you have Larry the Cat at Downing Street, as like a way to get people excited, and you can invite them to that's a legit cool experience. And I think but that level is 1% of all candidates. Most candidates are John, who's running for Congress in some district in suburban Michigan, and they don't have that star power, unless you're AOC and the U.S. side. She does, but so I think you have to come up with other incentives. It might be a cool event. It might be a small roundtable dinner or coffee, sit down with the candidate. And if you're not paying people, you can't be as prescriptive. So they are going to post or they're not, but you want to make it as easy as you can for them to post. You want to have cameras there. You want to take pictures. You want to send them assets they can use. If there's a recording and they're speaking, you want to send them videos or clips that they can distribute. So, setting it up to be as easy to participate as possible, making an event unique and interesting, whether it be a cool restaurant that they might not get to go to normally, or the White House. And that's I think that's kind of the way that campaigns can think about it. Nicole.
Yeah, I do think regardless, it is a very new thing for creators to be asked to participate in, you know? Like you said, a lot of the mainstream media is like, "Oh, why would they?" Influencers get this kind of negative reputation in certain spaces. And so to be asked to participate and become a part of something does feel really good and validating for the work that you produce. I think the key to, like Ryan said, also, creating a good, fun event that's really makes it easy for someone to create content, but also making it clear that you are including the influencers in your program, that you want to hear from them, that you want them to become a part of the campaign versus like, you're just my ad placement. Um, Leads to better results.
Yeah, I can totally imagine, and I sort of it would make for an amazing sort of story, wouldn't it? An influencer who turns up to an event and ends up getting super involved and committed to the campaign, and I'm sure there are stories like that out there, and that's awesome. I mean, so from brief conversations I've had with creators in the UK, and I've not got tons of friends with thousands and thousands of followers, but I've got a few. And I've sort of, spoken to them because I'm a political bore about this sort of thing, and I sort of say, "Oh, would you ever think about doing something for a political campaign?" And there's definitely been like a level of discomfort from them about taking money for political ends. Their brands are often built on, some of them, I guess they'd be the more political ones in your sort of categorization, that they're maybe journalists or former journalists. But then there are also, you know, comedians or lifestyle, influencers, or they talk a lot about parenting or food or gaming. And the sense I get is that they are either like the non-political creators are terrified of alienating their audience, potentially more than half their audience, if in the UK, if they're banging on about the Labour Party, but, actually, about half their audience are voting Tory or whatever it might be. Um, there's the sort of non-political creators who are worried about what their audience are going to think and are they going to alienate them. But then even the political creators who I kind of thought, might be more up for it, they are, I would say, have been equally worried about it because they go, well, my credibility is to the point we made earlier, it's my currency. No one will take me seriously on these issues if they know I'm taking money from one side or whatever it might be. How do you get over that hump? Like, do these creators actually want to talk about politics on both the political and the non-political? Are they willing to take the money?
It is much harder to get a creator to say, vote for Ken Livingston for London mayor than it is to get a creator to say, I support a woman's right to choose. The hardest work that we do out of all the work is the hard side political work because creators, endorsing a person is asking them a lot. So the reality is we just have to ask a lot of people. A creator a campaign might have a dream list of creators, and all 50 of those creators are like, no, we don't want to wade into that Senate race, and you have to just sort of go out there and find the people who are willing to, to say that kind of like very specific message. Now, it isn't as difficult to get them to talk about funding animal shelters. That's an easier ask, but yeah, I mean, it's really just it's an organizing challenge, I think, Nicole, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, unless you're Zoran Mamdani, then everyone's like, "Yeah, I wanna be a part of that campaign." Yeah, if you can create something really cool and unique, but that's not the usual way these campaigns go. But I think there are also ways to work around some of the nervousness that creators have about endorsing candidates. One being showcasing others who are endorsing that candidate and how that's worked out for them and what that experience has been like. So that's a piece of it. And then also having them start by maybe your first piece of content is just like, hey, have you looked into who's running in this election? Have you considered all the different points that they bring to the campaign? And allow them to see the responses from their audiences and then take that next step of making their official endorsement. Like, they can showcase to their audience that they've walked through the same process everybody should walk through in considering and then landed on making that decision to partner with and support a specific candidate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sort of taking the audience on the journey. It doesn't have to be a sort of endorsement from day one in the partnership or
Yeah.
of the campaign. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's like get ready with me, but it's like learn how I choose who I'm gonna vote for, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really cool format. I've actually not seen that before, but that's a great. I mean, presumably that's a sort of format that you guys have rolled out before. Yeah, that's really
We
smart.
we like a series of posts that begin with like a more soft kinda intro before the, vote for Ken language.
Yeah.
It sets the followers up and the algorithm to know what's coming next.
Yeah. And also that point you were making about, creators are much more willing to talk about issues by and large than candidates. That gives a really clear role for creators in races where you can sort of, use creators to raise the salience of particular issues. And then your sort of the role for your more classic ads can be to try and associate your particular candidate with that issue. And I can see how that would be a real good sort of 1-2 punch of a sort of comm strategy. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
and in the US, we have, like, the hard side, which is allowed to say vote for Ken, and the soft side, which is allowed to talk about the issues around Ken. So we that kinda naturally plays into the US political system with how we're allowed to do our spending. Although I haven't looked at all the Supreme Court, rulings today. It might be more free than it was a couple hours ago.
There's yeah, definitely some unlimited amount of spending now, so that'll be interesting. Um, but yeah, it also, like, helps kind of we've done a lot where, like Ryan said, we're working on the softer side where we can't say exactly who it is, but in a certain race, there's only one candidate that's actively supporting a woman's right to choose, and you can say, "Hey, have you looked at every candidate and seen who's supporting a woman's right to choose?" You know?
Yeah, we
Uh,
did we did a campaign, targeting, Latino voters around in the US around the importance of climate and voting with the climate. It was called Vote Like a Madre, and we never said, vote for Biden, but it would be super clear to anyone paying attention at all that we were talking about the only candidate who was interested in protecting the environment. So that can be really impactful, and it doesn't come across as much as advertising, which makes it, I think, even more impactful as creator content. And if you're a smart campaign, you can soften your persuasive audience with that content before you come in with the more hard sell campaign ads that tie Biden to the climate.
yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Now, another sort of in area which I'm interested to hear about is vetting. Now, vetting's, the brands I work with, vetting's important, right? The brands don't want to be associated with, people have said offensive things. I mean, in politics, it's even more complicated, right? The number of things or things that people might have said or the way they've voted in the past or issues they've supported. It's like, it must be incredibly tough. Like, you've got thousands and thousands of creators on your books. How do you manage that vetting at scale?
yeah, that is probably one of the most challenging pieces of the work that we do. um, because you do want to make sure that there is that safety and comfortability because you never know what the media is going to pick up from someone that they said a million years ago, and try to create a story out of it. So it's an understanding concern on the vetting front. However, when you look at the general voting population, they might be, listening to music that has explicit language in it and doing the regular things that we all do on an everyday basis, that maybe, like, a politician wouldn't wanna be seen doing, or saying in some way. So there's a little give and take. So on the vetting front, we wanna make sure that people aren't doing anything that is, like, that is harmful, dangerous, that they haven't the endorsement thing is tricky because you don't want them to have endorsed maybe your direct competitor, but also if they're willing to switch over, like we've worked in a lot of cases with Republicans who are deciding to now vote for a Democrat, that's actually really valuable to the campaign to have somebody openly express that they are, changing parties in order to vote for a candidate. So it really depends on a case by case basis and how comfortable any given campaign is with their vetting. We like to be proponents of working with the general population and being accepting of what they might be posting previously because sometimes we go a little bit overboard where we're doing criminal background checks to see someone had a DUI in 2003, versus versus like people on the other side are electing candidates who are openly criminals, not to steal Ryan's line, but like we're playing some interesting games when it comes to the vetting piece.
And
Yeah, and
and
it's like
and
it's interesting. Oh. I was
No,
just
no,
gonna
go, go,
say, like,
you-
you see, Kamala, like, had got an endorsement from Eminem, the hip hop artist, who certainly said many things in his songs that are not safe for this podcast. But at the same time, you'll have campaigns who are like, oh, this girl was in a swimsuit in Mexico in a post, and it's like, well, yeah, people go to the beach, and when they go to the beach, they typically wear swimwear, So I think it really is, people have to. One of the things Republicans don't think about that at all. Like they'd be happy to work with that attractive girl in the swimsuit. They'd ask her to wear a swimsuit for the post, But the Democrats are just much more conservative in this respect when working with creators, and we try to say like, look, the days of the days of the perfectly scripted campaign are clearly in the past, and if somebody is a good fit, they're passionate about you, they're going to make a good video. If they had a beer at a bar and they're over 21, we don't see that as a reason why you can't work with them as a creator.
yeah, I think that makes total
Over
sense. And
18 in your case.
yeah, yeah. And are you sort of you've got, as I said, thousands of creators on your platform. Are you working mainly directly with these creators, or are you sort of in agentsville? Are you having to battle sort of gnarly agents for rates and things like that on a sort of daily basis? How does it work?
It's all the things. So we've got our creator network that we're always growing. But for every program that we do, we have our team of what we call our digital relational organizers who are going out, finding new people and recruiting them into the program. So similar to what you would be doing for any like community organizing activation, we're finding people who care about these issues, who fit, what we're looking to partner with, and then we bring them in some cases, then you are working with agents and having to navigate that whole situation, which is a fun beast in and of itself. But we're not like your typical. This is our roster. This is all we have, and the only people that we work with.
Yeah, but
I
yeah,
will
and I
say
guess
though that in the last 5 years, we've seen creators with fewer and fewer followers getting agents. So agents are all over the place in this world, and one of the benefits of working with an organization like People First is we're dealing with the agents and the creators, so you can just focus on making sure the content's a good fit and the messenger is a good fit.
Yeah, and that's a huge sell, right? Because if you're a campaign, you could always do with more people and more resource. Suddenly having to manage, when you were speaking at the top about your pyramid and you're going, okay, well, it's 20 creators, suddenly that's, a good part of someone's job. Which is, it's a lot to manage, and the vetting and all that. So yeah, no, I think it's definitely I'm sure a very valued service that you are providing. Um, I want to touch on clipping campaigns, and it's something that we're seeing more and more of. Is and I get the sense campaigns are providing, relatively dry B-roll, basically, historical footage, current footage of candidates to these, clipping artists who make them suddenly look like super cool and dramatic, and then push them out there. Is that part of the offering? I mean, it seems like a relatively new thing. I saw, Trump and Harris doing that a lot in 2024, and it seems to have only gone on an upward trajectory, from there. Do you have creators who specialize in that sort of clipping activity?
We're big proponents of clipping, and we are always trying to sell it and bake it into the programs. We think it makes a lot of sense to both have the creators make the content, do clips and variations of that content that you can use on paid, but also on organic, and get that content into the hands of people who have just kind of broad accounts that kind of share popular memes and things in the news, et cetera. So we really encourage campaigns to do that. We're definitely seeing more of an uptick on that, but it's slower than you would think. So hopefully people listening to the podcast here, you will think more about clipping as part of their political strategy.
Yeah, I think you'd be crazy right now to be a candidate and not be thinking about clipping. It's so effective on particularly TikTok, I think. There's something just
Definitely.
Incredibly engaging about it. Okay, I want to pivot to issue-based campaigning, and where the ultimate audience isn't the general public, but actually the audience is political elites. Maybe your client is is a lobbyist, and they want to lobby for a particular outcome, and so their audience is going to be sometimes journalists, or it might be regulators, or it might be politicians. Presumably you play, a big role in that space. How does the approach to sort of creator marketing work when the ultimate audience is like an elite, basically?
Those are my favorite campaigns. They're the most fun to run. So, say you're trying to influence votes in Congress, and you've got six Congress folks, and you go to their districts, you recruit creators, they make the content, and then you take that content with paid and put it up against super targeted audiences. So their staff is seeing it, people who are working on the issues are seeing it, and then it becomes sort of like outsized in their mind, the conversation. And we've used this in the advocacy side. We've used it in the commercial side. It's really, really effective. If you have 15 different videos and you're running it in like tandem around these very specific audiences, it seems like everyone in your district is talking about XYZ issue. So that can be really, really impactful. And you don't need big creators to do that. You need creators in the district who are voters who can say, I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I believe that my congressperson should do XYZ. And then it that gets put in that congressperson's like reports, and it's being talked about in their meetings. It's really easy to kind of poke the bear that way.
Especially when you clip all those pieces together, and then in the visual identity, it looks also like so many people are talking about this. It can be really impactful. TikTok did a lot of this around the DMV
Yeah,
area.
we worked with TikTok when they were facing the U.S. ban to push back on it, and that was a kind of a mix of political and advocacy work that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was oh, wow, that's amazing you worked on that. That was something to behold. That was that was a moment where sort of political influencer marketing definitely was, like, on the main stage. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
incredible.
we you
Wow.
we in that case, we had small business owners in specific states talk about how TikTok had benefited their small business. And, it's hard to compete when you've got like a mom and pop shop saying like, "Don't shut me down. I need this account." So, yeah, that was a really effective campaign.
Yeah, and I lived in DC during this time, and so not only am I seeing this at work every day, every time I turn on the TV, I'm seeing all the videos. I go to the subway stop, I'm seeing the videos. I'm like, I can't get away from this, but that means it's doing what I want it to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, I've got my final question for you, which is, um, let's imagine that you're sort of a campaign manager or lobbyist or advocacy group leader has been listening to this, and they're thinking, okay, now's the time. I haven't done this before. I need to get into the influencer marketing game. I've got a relatively modest budget to start. Um, what's the first step they should take to sort of get on the path to doing this sort of activity that we've been talking about?
Well, I think, like with any good comms program, it's identify the audiences that you're looking to persuade, and then sort of work backwards to figure out who's going to be persuasive to those audiences. And from an execution standpoint, we have, as an agency, we run the whole full program from helping you find the creators to the reporting, all that. But we also work with campaigns to help them build internal cohorts that are more managed, kind of like between the two of us. We also work as sort of like co-pilots, where we can kind of step in and help you with certain parts of the creator experience. So I think tactically, there's a lot of ways you can execute it depending on a campaign's resources, and working with a firm like us or bringing in an internal team. There are tools, but I will say that it is going to be more hours intensive than you think it will be. There's no real set it and forget it way to do this, and it is a people business. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And the first thing that I always tell people who are looking to start a program or put together a program and they're like, I don't even know what to do, is to one, call me, and two, um, is to think about what your goal is and then work backwards from that goal. If you're looking to influence something very locally, okay, you maybe only need a short amount of time with a few creators and a very strategic approach. You're trying to change the whole country's perspective on LGBTQ plus individuals. You maybe need a longer time period. You need a large group of creators. So think about what your end goal of your first program would be and then work backwards.
That's
And
amazing.
and remember, you're not the audience too. This is something that people always forget. They're like, "Well, I don't like Graham Norton." And it's like, "Well, we're working with Graham Norton because they're trying to influence the LGBT, larger UK, not you specifically, marketer from New York." So it's like it can be people can get very caught up in like what their personal preferences are when it comes to content versus who's the audience going to respond to, and if you're not part of that audience, you're not supposed to get it necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. Nicole, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely awesome. I've learned a lot from it. And I think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant. So I wish you nothing but luck and that your company continues to grow. And yeah, I hope everyone follows you and I hope you get some interesting conversations potentially out of the back of this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful.